Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another Top Cut breakdown meta-analysis video. Today we're actually going over two tournaments. The first one is going to be a Bandai Online Regional hosted by PPG. Shout out to PPG, one, for just always getting me the info in a really timely manner. I really do appreciate it. And two, for just hosting awesome events. I'm going to have a link down in the description below to more of PPG's future events, just so you guys are aware of when they are. You can sign up for them if you would like to. That link will be down there in the description below. The other event is going to be a Louisiana 1K that took place over the weekend. This was an IRL event. Now, what's really interesting is we're going to be looking at two different formats today, because the Bandai Online Regional was not including Evolution Booster. If you guys didn't know, Evolution Booster actually released in America this past weekend, as for other parts of the world it's been out for almost a month. So the Online Regional did not include Evolution Booster. The Louisiana 1K did include Evolution Booster. So we'll be looking at two different formats, get a kind of cool perspective in terms of like a format shift from set 12 to Evolution Booster. But anyways, guys, if you're new here, definitely subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video. If you guys want to help support the channel and compete in competitive events just like this, go down in the description, check out the Patreon. Does help out the channel a lot. You also get to see where my head's at competitively with the articles, maybe get some coaching if you're interested in that. Either way, guys, does help the channel a lot, and it'll help get your game up. That being said, let's get started. All right, once again, shout out PPG for awesome infographics just like this. This is going to be a little bit different than the normal meta breakdown videos we do here. I'm actually not going to go through like slide by slide, deck by deck. I think this is actually the better way to do it, because we are talking about two different formats, and I feel like going slide by slide, talking about like maybe some repeat decks, or talking about the differences there, I feel like it get a little bit confusing. So I think the layout here just kind of shows everything nicely. We have the PPG top 16 and Louisiana 1K top 8. Again, keep in mind the Bandai event was no Evo Booster, and the Louisiana 1K was including Evo Booster. Talking about the PPG event first, again, it was an online webcam event. I believe it was about 250-ish players. We have the top 16 here. Look at this info on the left though. First place King Piccolo, second place King Piccolo, third place King Piccolo, top 4, 3 King Piccolos. This is actually hilarious. It's just so funny. I've said it many times, like how much of a joke this deck was considered at the beginning of set 12 format, and just look at these insane results, dude. Firstly, shout out to Marcel Russell and Frank Miller, my two teammates that got second and third place with the deck. Awesome showing. Marcel and Frank have been killing it, both with this deck and just in webcam in general. So again, shout out to them. But regardless, let's talk about the meta. So King Piccolo, in terms of the set 12 meta, I really don't think it changes too much in Evolution Booster. Evolution Booster was a really good example of a side set, because it doesn't completely shake up the meta. It adds some really cool decks into the mix, which we'll see when we talk about the Louisiana 1K. But as far as set 12 goes, I think red has to be the strongest color. I think red is definitely the strongest color in the game right now, and King Piccolo is sitting at the helm of that. When you're looking at red decks, you're looking at King Piccolo, you're looking at Launch, and you're looking at Red Broly and Bulma to like a lesser degree. But red just puts the most decks in the most top cuts the most consistently. So I think red is definitely the best color of the meta. That being said, King Piccolo is sitting at the top of that throne. It's just the pinnacle of free. It just does so much for free. We talked about it so many times. Similar to a rival deck, except you don't actually lose cards when you rival. You actually net more cards and plus when you rival King Piccolo. Yeah, a lot of people look at King Piccolo as just like a 15k spam deck, but it's really so much more than that. You have Piccolo Jr., Scion of the King. That's 20k double strike you're playing for free by negating an attack. You've also got the Tambourine combo with Piccolo Time to Fight. That 40k attacker is probably force damage almost every single time you swing with it. King Piccolo, I think, looks really good even going into set 13. You know, we talked about King Vegeta and Bardock's crew coming out in set 13, both here on the channel and on the Patreon. I've talked about it more there in terms of like how competitive I think those decks will be when they come out. But I really think King Piccolo is still really, really much so in the conversation in set 13. That's how powerful this deck is. Again, definition of free. Who cares? It starts 6 life. Who cares? The leader doesn't draw. It just does so much. It's actually really, really funny to see. Moving on to Sin Shenron, though, this is a really interesting one, because we don't usually see this much Sin representation in any given top cut. Whether it's a top 32, top 16, top 8, we're usually expecting like one Sin, if any. That's what we kind of been used to seeing over the past several months with Sin Shenron. But landing 3 spots here is pretty interesting. I mean, for a long time, it appears, and I think it still rings true, that Mecha Frieza is probably the best yellow deck, but Sin is a bit sturdier, and what I mean by that is Mecha has to cut a lot of life to do a lot of its effects. Sin, you have really flexible play styles with. You can play the super aggressive game, and those decks generally tend to, play as many of the big Sin Shenrons as possible. Also play the Electromancer package, and at that point, you're trying to go into like turn 2, turn 3, sell Xeno, maybe backed up by a Swift Retaliation Cooler if you happen to assemble that combo all together very early. But besides that, I mean, in set 12, Sin did get a lot of aggressive tools. But besides that, I mean, there's always the typical Sin Shenron control stuff the deck has always been able to lean on, which is definitely quite good. So I think Sin is really good for those flexible players. I did mention in a video previously, like, if you like playing all the different styles of the game, but you don't want to like break the bank by buying a ton of different decks, just buy all the Sin Shenron cards. If you feel like playing aggro one week, you can play aggro Sin. If you feel like playing control one week, you can play control Sin. If you feel like playing mid-range, you can play that somewhere in the middle, and Sin's gonna work out really well for you. Another deck I think is looking pretty good in set 13 as well. Then we got Dark Broly. I'm really interested to see what happens with Dark Broly in set 13. We did see a really strong card coming up for Dark Broly in set 13. It's a new 6-drop Dark Broly. Refills your drop area, so it's a 30k that basically takes place of Gravy, which is kind of insane. Maybe I'm talking a bit too much about set 13. It is about like a month and a half, 2 months away, but I'm kind of just looking to the future now that we know what all the cards do. But I'm also looking at the fact that Dark Broly, I think, is very likely to receive some sort of hit on the ban list. I don't know what it could be. I think it could be a Heartfelt Plea ban. I think it could be a leader errata, which is my preferred way of dealing with the deck. I talked about that in a video last week where I did ban list, wish list predictions. Go check that out if you haven't seen it. But Dark Broly, it's got to be one of the best decks in the meta, but I think it does get pushed out pretty hard by red decks, and we know King Piccolo is taking up a lot of spots here. Launch also takes up 2 spots in the top cut. Talk about that in a second. But all the presence of Violent Rays, I think, does push out Dark Broly quite a bit. So while I think it's one of the top decks, as long as red reigns supreme, Dark Broly might have a bit of a tough time getting further in top cut than maybe a top 8 or a top 4. Anyways, then we have Launch, another red deck in the top cut. Again, super flexible deck. That's got to be the recurring theme of a lot of this top cut here, is just flexibility. We see it with Sin, we see it with Launch. You can play the blue-red, you can play the blue-red-green, and you can play the red-green. They're all really strong. We have seen Red-Yellow Launch top an event as well. That was also another online webcam event, but honestly, I wouldn't put too much stake in that one being super consistently competitive. I think the red-blue-green Launch is probably the best way to build the deck, but red-green has a bit more of that explosive factor. So in my opinion, if you want to play something more explosive, play red-green Launch, because your potential to burn the opponent super early in the game and almost go lethal turn 2, turn 3 is really high. But if you want to play more of like a sturdy mid-range deck, I would say go blue-red-green Launch. You're probably going to be a bit safer there if you enjoy mid-range a bit more. Then we've got a Toppo. Toppo is really interesting. It's one of those control decks that's not really sitting at the top of the meta compared to like Invoker or Control Sin Shenron, but it is a deck that's very interesting because the leader floodgates the opponent in a way almost similar to Hachiyak. It doesn't limit how many times they can attack per turn, but it does limit the number of battle cards they can play per turn. And this format is so, all the decks just seem like they go so wide. Even Dark Broly, they go so tall with 30k battle cards. They do play a lot of battle cards, so they do go wide in that sense. Toppo, limiting that, if you don't have good interaction to deal with a unison, that could be really tough. But Spring Kai Spacetown Raveler it's got to be one of those popular cards in the format at this point. Like, I can't imagine that all the King Piccolo lists weren't playing it, right? So a card like that existing in the format does hurt Toppo a bit, but I think it's still a pretty cool yellow control deck to take a look at. We got one green Gotenks. Man, we haven't seen this deck do anything since like the beginning of set 11. I think it's topped like once or twice here or there, but it really is so sporadic. It's cool to see it here. I mean, green actually does have some nice rep in this top cut with 2 spots. We're so used to many tournaments of seeing absolutely no green in any top cut, so seeing Gotenks here is pretty cool. I think it's decently reliable. The boss monster Grim Reaper is still quite good, does a lot when it's played, does a lot when it's removed for the player, so I think it's not a terrible pick. We have one Vedex. We're used to seeing this. I think one Vedex is slotted in most top cuts, at least for the past few tournaments. It's just a good aggro deck. It really is like old school DBS aggro in a sense, where it just spams a lot of battle cards, usually low cost battle cards. But even at that point, they do now generally play Demigra, a true demon god, right? The new 5-drop from draft box 6. That's a powerhouse of a black card, and your leader sets you up for that pretty nicely. So I think that works out pretty well. We've got our Hirudegarn here that was playing the Hirudegarn chain from draft box 6. That's honestly a really cool look. I think this was Michael Friend. Shout out to him if it was. I think that's who was playing this. And he always plays super rogue decks. So very cool to see this deck and that pilot make it so far in the top cut. And then we got one Turles. Haven't seen much of Turles since the start of set 12, where Marcel got second with Turles at the PPG Miami event, but still a cool deck nonetheless. It just does a lot of what these other decks do. It plays free battle cards. Only problem is, I think green lacks a bit of finishing power right now, which I actually think Evolution Booster fixes, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And we do have the one Mecha Frieza. Not anything too unusual here. Mecha's got to be one of the top decks of the meta. It's got such a high ceiling, but I think Mecha can sometimes lose to like its own clunkiness. Like, you do play a lot of extra cards, you play a decent amount of 10k combos. I think when your hand is really good in Mecha, your turns are unbelievably broken, but I think when your hands are bricky in Mecha, it's really hard to play the game. So I think that's kind of what happens with Mecha some of the time, but that'll probably change set 13 with some of the new cards coming out that kind of directly boost Mecha. But going on to this 1k event, this was a 35 player IRL event. We have the top 8 here. First place, OG Green Broly. Now we know OG Green Broly got some support in Evolution Booster, particularly as a 1-drop that when it's KO'd by either player, it helps you go into more of your Brolys. So I think dropping the 6-drop here is actually a little bit easier now, and I will have this player's deck profile on the channel this week, so make sure to stay tuned for that. 2 Dark Broly in top 8 here. Again, not too surprising. It's just a really strong deck, and it looks like in this particular tournament there was actually no red in the top 8, so that actually makes a lot more sense as to why Dark Broly is the most highly repped deck in this top 8. Then we've got the Aggro Sin. Again, same thing, flexibility. This particular player chose to go with Aggro Sin. Very, very cool stuff here. This does look a bit more like an aggressive top 8 here, so it seems like a pretty good environment for Aggro Sin. I think Control Sin can do well against aggressive decks, but it kind of depends what that aggressive deck is. And honestly, if you're playing Control Sin, the dice roll is a bit more important, because some decks can completely play around the 9-drop Sin by their turn 2, but if you go first and you get to your turn 2 first, you actually set up your 9-drop very nicely, and it usually interrupts most of what your opponent's trying to do. The next deck was a Vegex deck with the Catapesla engine. Now Catapesla actually got another pretty cool card in Evolution Booster. I believe it helps you recur Catapeslas out of the drop area, which in Vegex is perfect because your leader mills Catapeslas, so picking those up and evolving with that new Catapesla card is really nice. Also, the 1-drop Catapesla now has an additional search target, so the engine becomes more consistent overall. I've always thought that was a really good engine for black decks to play. Just really big crit barrier attackers. I don't think you can really go wrong. We've got 1 TN. Now, honestly, in Evolution Booster, I think TN really revives green really heavily, and I think that's because TN actually has good finishing power where a lot of green decks don't really have that. I think the closest thing you can think about with that is like Go Tanks with Grim Reaper of Justice, but all you really got there is a big dual attacker that's honestly not too hard to deal with. TN has the long way to rematch combo, Goku and TN, huge double striker, huge triple striker, one's deflect, one's barrier, so you have a lot of protection against a lot of things. I think that's really good. Blue Yellow Gotenks, we haven't really seen this at all since like set 10, so it's kind of cool to see a resurgence here. I'm assuming this is one of those decks that wants to sit on Violent Rush Bojack and kind of just abuse that card. I did mess around with this deck before I played the Kid Goku, or Kid Gohan rather, variant of the deck. I just think that Gotenks doesn't draw quite enough cards, but maybe in more of an aggressive meta, you know, you can get that burst of cards by taking a bunch of life to hand, and maybe your opponent activates some extra cards, like if they're Dark Broly, for instance, or even OG Broly has to activate extra cards to get their engine going as well. So maybe if this was more of like an extra card heavy meta, Gotenks had a better shot. And then 1 Blue Trunks. It's a cool deck. I don't think it gets a lot of boosts from Evolution Booster, but I think it actually gets some cool toys to play with in set 13 with some of the Trunks and Kid Gohan, or Teen Gohan rather, skill as support. I think it's gonna be pretty cool to look at. But anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed the video today. I know it was more talking rather than like visual components, but I think this was kind of the best way to just list it off and go into 2 different formats without getting too confusing. So hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.